Yeah. This talk is nothing to do with Joomla, but it's everything to do with the web and, in fact, computing in general, really. And it's all about how we use names when we're on the internet. Oh, sorry, when we're completing a form. And bizarrely, I've given this talk now about 25 times to pretty much every user group in the UK, in the north of the UK, JavaScript, PHP, DevOps, Java, pretty much young web developers, pretty much anybody, because everybody seems to find it useful. So just in case you didn't possibly know me or who I am, although I think I've met most of you in person and others only online. My name's Brian Teeman. I live here in Leeds, which for those of you not in the UK is right in the middle. If you think of Britain as a triangle, I'm right in the middle of that. And I haven't moved from more than 2 kilometers from my home in the last, almost coming up to 12 months. And it's driving me crazy. So as I say, this is all about building websites and importantly about building web forms. And pretty much every form on the web asks us to put in your name. And this is where we all go wrong. So what's the problem with this? Well, let's have a look. This is Yahoo, the British version. This is their sign-up form. And they ask for the first name and the surname. And Google asks for the first and the last. This is booking.com, first name.
I don't know how to help with that. There are other things you can try.
Okay, Google, shut up. Sorry about that. Right, so this is booking.com, which uses first name and last name, and also asks for a title. Eventbrite, first name and last name. Facebook, first name and surname. So all of these are asking for different things. And this one, if memory serves correctly, is actually from Civi CRM, which is asking for a prefix, a first name, a middle name, a last name, a suffix, and a nickname, which you might think would cover everything, but you'll find out it doesn't. So the first thing you have to think about when you're putting a name field or fields on a form is, why do you need the name? And what is it you're going to do with that name? So if it's something like Facebook here, where I need a friendly greeting, I need to know the familiar name. Brian likes, Christiana likes, Phil likes. So I need to know the friendly greeting. But if it's for a directory or a listing, I need the more formal name. Now, this is actually from Leeds University's staff directory. And this person, Dr. Subhajit Basu, it's clearly important for him within the context of the university staff directory to show that he's a doctor and he's a whatever an FRSA is. So can anyone tell me, and you're welcome to turn your speakers on, by the way, your microphones on, by the way. Can anybody tell me who this is?
Bjork.
Okay, yeah, that's right, it's Bjork. Now, her full name is Bjork Goodman's daughter. And it literally means Goodman is her dad. It's not a family name, it's her dad. And in Iceland, it would be normal for her just to be known by the name Bjork as a single name. But you can use both. But what letter do you think she'd expect to find herself in a directory?
B.
Yeah, it's B. And so Bjork would be looking under B when she finds herself in an alphabetical list. Now, if you've asked for a first name and a last name, she would have put Bjork and Goodman's daughter, and most likely you would have sorted it on the G for Goodman's daughter. Does anybody know who this gentleman is?
Nope.
At least one person in the room, Renee, has met him.
No clue who this is.
Okay, it's a very young picture of Hung from Joomla.
Mm.
Yeah? And Hung's full name is Hung Din. And Hung is the given name, and Din is his family name. But when I asked him, what do I call you, both formally and informally, he said it doesn't matter. You can call me Mr. Hung, Mr. Din, Hung, Din, pretty much anything you want. So there is no difference in formality between the two names. No one's going to know who this is. This is a fictional person. But I'm going to say that she's a Spanish lady called Maria Jose Jareno Quinones. And if anybody speaks Spanish and I got my accent wrong, I apologize. Now, in this case, Maria Jose is her given name. Carreno is her family name from her father. And Quinones is the family name from her mother. Sometimes you might see the duh in between. You would call her Señorita Carreno, not Señorita Carreno de Quinones. And she would expect to find herself in the dictionary under C. Now, this starts to become very interesting when, for example, you're running a hotel booking website and you have a husband and wife and 2 children, and all 4 of them will have different names. And that can cause issues for some cultures, which only allow married people, for example, to share a room. In Brazil, by the way, this would be swapped. This is father-mother. In Brazil and Portugal, it would be mother-father, just to be different. What about these two? No?
That's
Okay.
Nicholas.
Yeah, on the right is Nicholas Dinosopoulos of Akiba fame, and on the left is his wife, Crystal, of Lucid Fox. Now, Nicholas would write his name in Greek like that. Now, if you're doing a form, do you want him to write it in Greek or in Latin characters? Because it gets interesting. Because if you were to transliterate his name using the standard transliteration rules, that's what it would be. Up until 1996, there was an international standard which gave that as his name. And since 1996, there's a new international standard which gives this as his name. As a result, Nicholas's documentation is different based on how long he's had some of those items, which can cause identity issues in countries that don't understand that. Now, oh, I seem to have jumped a slide. Yeah. So Crystal, can anybody spot the difference between, who's Nicholas's wife, can anyone spot the difference with her name?
No S on the end.
Correct. So the feminine, even the family name or the last name, is spelt differently for the feminine. Me, what's my name? Well, my name, obviously, as you know, it's Brian Teeman, but I actually have 2 middle names. It's Guy and Joseph. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, none of the forms that we saw at the beginning either had a middle name field, which is fine, or they just had one field for one name or one initial, because of course, nobody has more than one middle name. Why does this matter? Well, my mortgage was with one company, and an insurance policy on the mortgage and endowment was with another company. And one company wrote it down as Brian Guy Teeman, and the other company wrote it down as Brian Joseph Teeman. And my bank account is in Brian Guy Joseph Teeman. And when they all had to talk to each other, they all refused to, because they said it was different people, that I was 3 different people. So that can cause issues. Renee, who's this?
This is Hans Arnhem. No, that's what his nickname is.
Okay. So this is Hans, who's now in charge of the Joomla social media team,
Yeah.
I believe. And this is going to be really annoying because I've got someone from the Netherlands in the room who's going to tell me that I'm talking this bit wrong. So Hans is his first name, and Vandermeer is all his family name.
Yeah, that's true.
But Van der in the middle, those two words in the middle, are what's known as a tussenvoegsel.
That's right.
Yes?
Yep.
And I think Van means from, and der is like the, and
Yeah.
meer is the sea,
A lake.
the lake. So it means Hans from the lake.
Right.
Now, where it's interesting, notice that Van der are using not capitals. And tussenvoegsel means insertion is the closest English translation to that. And it's generally unique to the Netherlands and also to Belgium, but I'll come back to Belgium in a minute. Now, you would call Hans meneer, which means Mr. Van der Meer,
Yeah.
or Hans van der Meer. When it's meneer Van der Meer, they're capitals. When it's Hans van der Meer, they're not capitals. In the sorting, he would expect to find himself under M for Meer. Because Van der, although it's part of his family's name, it's not what we would call his last name. Complicated. It's definitely not a middle name like I have Guy and Joseph. In Belgium, the rules on capitalization are the opposite way around. And you capitalize when it's the full name, and you don't capitalize when it's meneer. But otherwise, it's the same. And this is pretty much exclusively to the Netherlands and Belgium.
Yeah, and in his passport would be written as surname Van der Meer with Van der with lowercase letters.
Yeah. And this is a Dutch travel website. Yeah. And we can see that on this Dutch travel website, it asks for first name, first name, tussenvoegsel, and after last name. So they've actually adjusted their form for that because that's a Dutch website. But if Hans was filling out a form anywhere else in the world, he's going to have to decide where to put that tussenvoegsel. Yeah. Okay, who's this? Pele. Okay.
He's got 4 names in real life. I can't remember them.
There they are. So his real name is Edson Arantes do Nascimento. And if anyone follows football or soccer, most Brazilian football players use a nickname. They don't use their given name. And this is also very, very common in Thailand, where people are known by their nickname. So his passport would say Edson Arantes do Nascimento, even though everybody in the world knows him as Pele. So if you think back to that form we had the Facebook post I had right at the beginning, you wouldn't say Edson likes this person. You would say Pele likes. But the form didn't offer anything any field he could use to put the word Pele in. Who's this guy? Okay, this is, I don't know if any of you have ever met. This is Jean-Marie Simonet, or Infograph, one of my fellow co-founders.
I was going to say infograph because that's all
Yes.
I could remember.
Yeah, okay. So the reason why I chose Jean-Marie is twofold, two reasons. One, he has a hyphen in his first name. So if you have a regular expression rule that says only letters in your name field, you're failing. But also because, like most French people, when they're filling out a form, they don't write it like this. They write it like this. And if you ever, so we just saw this the first time when we did J and Beyond. Every single person from France signed up and wrote their name like this. And when I've asked about it, they say, oh, it's just common usage that your family name, you write in capitals to make it clear that it's separate to your familiar name, your first name. So, and as far as I'm aware, this is a uniquely French thing. Oh, so also there are rules that people might have on their field about capitals, how many capital letters you can have. You might fail if it was a French person. This guy is Ewan McGregor. But again, McGregor could be spelled. Yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah, we'll come on to that in a minute. It could be spelled all these different ways. I actually forget which one his. I think that's Ut. I think that is the actual one that he uses. But again, you can see there we've got a capital letter right in the middle, which will also fail a lot of regular expressions on forms. This person, I'm sure you will know.
Hugh.
It's a regular here.
Yeah, what's his full name?
Douglas.
Something Smith. Douglas Smith, yeah.
Yeah, it's Hugh Douglas Smith. That's got a hyphen in. And again, a lot of form fields will have a character set, the restriction of like this at the top, which is just the letters A to Z in both lowercase and uppercase. So a lot of people who have a hyphen in their name end up writing it with a space, or even without a space at all, and that's not their name. Now, this person you don't. This is a fictitious person. His name will change during his lifetime, so that's not something that for most of us in this room will ever experience. So his name at birth was Muhammad Al-Jamil, which means the beautiful, Ibn Nidal, the son of Nidal, Ibn Abdulaziz, who is the son of Abdulaziz, the Palestinian, Al-Filistini. So that's his name when he was born. As he's now an old man, his name has changed. So it's still Muhammad al-Jamil ibn Nidal ibn Abdul Aziz al-Filistini, but he's now Abu Karim Muhammad al-Jamil. So Abu Karim, father of Karim, obviously his son, is now the first part of his name. And quite often, depends on which Arab culture the person's in, they may go by Abu Karim, or he may be known as Muhammad. So he actually, the name that he's known by will change. The name his friends call him could even change.
Will it change if he gets more children?
It's just the first son.
Okay.
Again, some of this may change in certain Arabic cultures, but generally it's the first son. And Abu just means father, just as Ibn means son. So it's now I doubt very much if anyone knows this guy. This guy is a Linux developer in the UK. Is mainly responsible, I think, for pretty much all of the work done on ARM and RISC OS. And his name is Wookie. Just Wookie. His passport says his name is Wookie. His credit cards, his driving license, all his documentation, everything says his name is Wookie. If you ask him, is that your first name or your last name? He says, no, it's neither of them. It's my name. Now, how many of you have seen a form which has both a first name and a last name field where they are not both required? It's kind of standard defaults.
Yeah.
Well, he can't fill that in.
Surely
not
it
so-
gets the first and the last if it's only one.
Sorry?
Must be the first and the last if it's only one.
Well, yes, but he won't put it into one of them. He's a bit anal about this, and he will not complete the form if it asks for a first name and a last name, or a first name and a family name, because his name is just Wookie. And
Why not just all last name and last name?
yeah, he's very, very particular about this. I've never really spoken to him exactly about why it is just Wookie, but I do remember him refusing to attend a conference because the conference insisted on him completing a form that said first name and last name.
It must be fun
Yeah.
at parties. Is there ever a form with real name written on it?
So at the end of the day, you have to think what you're going to do with the data. Yeah. What are why are you asking for it? So the first question is, are you going to split it into two parts or even more than two parts? Now, the Joomla registration form only has one field for name. And this is why. Because there is no reason with what you are doing with the data on a Joomla registration form to separate between first name, last name, family name, familiar name. Yeah, so before you start creating your own forms and putting those fields in, think, do I actually need them? It's the user's name. Yeah, it's their name. So Christiana has a hyphen in her name as well. And, if she can't write her name the way that it's written, it's her name. It's wrong. And she's also got quite a long name, as is Hugh. And don't put limits on how big this field can be. An input field can be displayed at a different size to how much data it can take in it. So don't be fooled and make the field too short. I know Nicholas Dinosopoulos had problems in the past on, I think, one of the JM Beyond years where my fault, I made the full name field too short.
Could Crystal fill it in though?
Yeah, he wasn't married yet. And then if you're going to split it, you need to work out how you're going to split it and what you're going to split it into. Yeah. So I say make it optional. And try to avoid the words first name and last name because they don't necessarily have in England, first name and last name are pretty much the same as first name and family name. So we switch that, or we can switch the terminology. That's not true in all cultures and all countries. In China, it would be written family name, familiar name, so given name. So it's written the other way around. So try to avoid using things like first and last. If you need the data to be able to display it in a dictionary or a staff directory, so you're going to sort of ask people what field do you want to sort by. And in a Joomla sense, if you're looking at the Joomla contact form, there is even an option there where it actually says, at least for the webmaster, which of the fields are you going to be sorting by? Well, should you be displaying titles? So again, this really does depend. So if it's an academic website, it might be really important for someone to display that they're a doctor or professor or whichever degrees they've got. But it's not just about the type of websites as a state for the university, it's also cultural. So I know in Germany, for example, it's culturally important to say that you're a doctor. Yeah? All the German chancellors have all been doctors. It's culturally important to say that. So you need to have the ability for them to put that. But for just a regular form, you probably don't need that at all. And you could start to getting a bit crazy. So obviously there is the tendency now to make sure that these fields are gender neutral or accept all the gender possibilities. This is a screenshot that I took last month, and it's of Fortnum and Mason's hampers mail order website. And you can see they have a wide range of possibilities. Military ones, legal ones like judges, international ones like Sheikh, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And I can guarantee you they will still have missed something off. I don't know if they've done this seriously or as a joke, but it is live, and I do know of one other. There is another website I've come across which has done a very similar list. So, as I kept saying during the talk, input rules. Yeah, you've got to be really careful. Some people have a tendency, they want their data to look nice and standardized. So they let you type in what you want, but then they save it in a special format. So they save it as capitalized. Don't. It may not be. Yeah, it may be different. It's up to the user. Don't restrict it to alpha characters. Allow spaces and dashes. And I should add, allow apostrophes as well. And when you're allowing apostrophes, you need to allow all the different apostrophes. And there's at least 3 that I know of. So that means don't restrict it to ASCII 128, allow the extended characters as well. If there's no one in this room who's got an apostrophe, it's very common in Ireland to be called O'Connor, for example, and there is an apostrophe between the O and the C. And Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Exchange, when you become a new employee at a company and they give you your account, it says, what's your name? So they write Michael O'Connor, and it will automatically give you an email address, MO apostrophe Connor at companyname.com. Unfortunately, Microsoft Exchange will not accept an email that has an apostrophe in it. And so that person never gets any email. Yeah, so it's a good reason to why you should not have restrictions. And finally, don't make all the fields required. So what do I recommend? I recommend 2 fields, full name, and what should we call you, and then with an explanation about what does that mean. So in this case, it's what should we call you, for example, when we send you mail, or what should we call you, for example, when we print it as your name on the back of a shirt. And that could also be, what should we call you? Actually, you know what? I have a nickname. I'd rather you call me by my nickname. So Brian Mitchell, who's the current OSM president, actually prefers to be called Mitch and not Brian. So Mitch is not part of his name, but it's the nickname he grew up with, the common name. the informal name that he would prefer to use. So he would write on this thing, full name Brian Mitchell, what should we call you? Mitch. And again, don't assume the parts of the name. Don't assume that the first part is the given name and the last part is the family name, because that's not always true. And I've seen it in the past, scripts on the Joomla forums to separate the Joomla field into two fields. We'll take all your data, we'll split it on the space, and we'll give it into two fields. You then get invalid data because you're assuming that the space is a separator, and it doesn't have to be. Again, if you want Nicholas, for example, to only write his name on your form in A to Z with no accents, then, in other words, not in Greek letters, you need to tell him that, because you might have translated this page. So the page might be displayed to him in Greek. And if it is, I can guarantee you he'll fill out his name in Greek. So if you want him to put his name in English Latin letters, you need to make sure that you tell him that. Or you might even ask him to put it both. Again, it's going to depend on what you're going to use the name for. If it's just for an internal purpose, you would probably want it in your local character set. It means you're going to contact them, then you might want to do it in their own language. And the final one about those rules is you should never, ever, ever, ever display to someone your name is invalid. You should never tell someone you've spelt their name, the name wrong. It's their name. They've had it all their life. They probably know how to spell it much better than you do. So never have this. In this case, it's because of that special letter, which I can't pronounce. But I'm sure Brian will understand fully all about that. Well, it's my name. It's not yours. I know how to spell it. Been doing it all my life. So don't validate it. Think about, why do you need to know what my name is? And that's the key thing. And that will govern everything about what you put there as a field. So instead of wondering what should you offer in the salutation field, should I have Mr., Mrs., Ms., Mix, all the different gender neutral versions and gender variations, think to yourself, do I even need to ask this question? Because if you don't need to ask the question, don't. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to stop the sharing, and then if anybody has questions, by all means, fire away.
I've got one. What? Oh yeah, very good talk. Well done.
Thank you.
No, that's good. That's really good.
Very good. My question is, what is Gary's name? Pop quiz.
His name isn't Pop Quiz.
His name is not Pop Quiz, but Gary is not his name.
No,
Gareth.
It's not Gary, no.
I know what it is, but he might not want it known. But it's not Gary.
It's not Gary, no. An imposter.
Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
I've actually, so Sean's just joined a little late because he was looking after the children. But we've actually got exactly this issue. So Sean does a site, Law and Sport, which is very popular and has a lot of users. And we started getting problems with people not being, well, Sean, do you want to explain the situation you have?
I think Brian just summed it up at the end. I only caught the last bit, but essentially we use Community Builder and CB, wherever it used to be CB subs, now called, I think, CB paid subscriptions. And up until probably about 6 months, maybe a year ago, we never had any issues with this. whatsoever, none. And we've had, for the best part of, so prior to that, we had 18, 20,000 registered members from all over the world, Japan, Nordic countries, pretty much never an issue. No, not once did we have a problem. And then up until probably about 6 months ago, we started to get the users being able to register, but then not being able to log in. Or not being able to get access through the site because it was telling them that there was a unicode. I haven't got it to hand because of this, so apologies, because I was just dealing with terrorist children. But yeah, and it was coming up with basically an error message though, and then people were having to email us to say, "Hey, can you help me? I've just paid for a subscription often to your service." So I'd imagine it's got something to do with CB paid subscriptions, maybe an integration. But we just paid and we can't get access. Can you help? Or I'm a standard member.
It's actually something that Richard knows all about as well, because it's a lot of it's to do with the character set that's being used in the database.
Yeah, so basically like an L and a line across it seems to be one that's, I think it's Polish.
There's a lot that cause the problem. So one of the other problems you get, I didn't mention it before. So there's an open issue in Joomla that the menus are not correctly sorted alphabetically in some languages. And right, so for example, I forget which letter it is, so I'm just going to fake it. So we have the letter A, and we have the letter A with an accent, and we have the letter A with another accent. So I would probably think that the alphabetical order would be A with an accent, A with an accent, B, C, D, E. Okay, but in some languages, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, Z, A with an accent, A with an accent. And the problem is that we use the sorting method from MySQL, the database language, and that has a default language. So if we change the default language, the character set of the language, I think it was Danish. It might have been Danish. I might be wrong that it came up with, but we've had it before. If we change the sorting the language of the database, it'll work for that language, and then it'll be wrong for all the others. And there's nothing you can do about that one. But it is your specific one. It's also down to the use of character sets and the character set in the database. And it's also probably down to one of the fields having no rule on the creation of the form, but it has a validation rule on when they're trying to log in with it. So it's letting them quite happily, it's letting Renee quite happily sign up as Renee, which is E with an acute accent. But on the input form, it only lets him use the letter E. And so when he tries it, it doesn't match and it fails. And I mean, I'm sure Renee could probably tell me many times that's happened.
I can't tell you how many mails I get with my name spelled like R-E-N and then Krijveld. The last E is just skipped because they don't understand the E with the accent. So it's horrendous.
Yeah, I gathered it was a character set issue. And I was saying to Sean, it's probably ideal not to change the database way we store it. It might be bad, but it was coming down more from the practical to the almost the someone to let in to more the ethical, as in should we restrict it? What is
so the question,
the ethics of it? It's the person's name.
No, it's really easy to solve. It's really easy to solve. Yeah. So the problem is, in your case, is you're asking them for their name, and you're using that name as their login name. Okay. So, and the login name needs to have restrictions. You've identified it needs to have restrictions, but the two can't be the same.
It's in MySQL, it's even more complicated. It's not only the character set, it's a thing which is called collation, which doesn't exist in any other kind of database. And what also comes together is that you have different versions of the Unicode standard. So meanwhile, this what we use in Joomla core, the Unicode collation is meanwhile outdated.
Yeah.
But the thing is, for the sorting, you would have to do that depending on the language which is shown in the front end. So but also dependent on the content language. What do you do if you sort Greece stuff together with Russian stuff, together with Turkish stuff in the front end, which currently shows Russian language? And then what shall happen if you switch that to, let me say, French language?
So
So you have to think about what do you want to do with it. But
Yeah.
then the next problem is with the collation, it also decides not about sorting, but about what's the same, what copies to something else. Is an E with an accent and an E without an accent, is it the same or not? And it is like Brian said, if you have a certain character set and collation, and then you use that as the login name, you violate a unique key with it. Because there is another Renee who has the accent on the other E. Not on the last one, but maybe on the first one, yeah? And so you think what happens? You get the unique key for the username violated. That's a really messy thing. And at the end, it's really like Brian says, you have to think about what do you want to do with the data and which effort do you want to put in to make it work in the way you need.
So in your specific case, the solution I would suggest is to have a login name, yeah, which is different, which is not necessarily the same as the name field. And let's face it, you've already got 20,000 people, you're bound to have started to get duplicates. So even my name, I do know there is one other Brian Teeman in the world. We found each other on Facebook. He hates me because, for a different reason to everybody else. Because I've got the username Brian Teeman on every social platform. And every time he tries to log in somewhere or to create an account, he can't because I've already got it. But no, we have a good laugh about it. He also was struggling to get his first job, which is, guess what? Computer science. What languages was he looking to get a job in? MySQL, PHP. And every time he applied for a job in America, he's in California. And what happens is people don't bother reading the resume. They just Google the name. So if they Google, Richard Smith, they're going to get so many people they can't tell who it is. They Google Brian Teeman, you get like 500 million hits, which are all clearly with the same avatar, a 50-year-old guy living in England. So people thought he was actually trying to use my name to get the job. And about 6 months later, he did tell me that he'd got a job. He got in touch to say, I've got my first job in computing, in PHP and MySQL. And I said, well, how did you solve the problem? He said, I applied under a fake name. But yeah, using it, login names and real names, keep them separate. You'll avoid that as a problem.
Because then at least you can say the login names have to be Latin. You can restrict it to the character set. But yeah, you're not being rude. Whereas to say your name has to be restricted is just not.
Correct. There's no ethical issues involved. You're not applying any cultural restrictions on it at all. You're just saying it's a login name. We need the login name to be 8 characters, A to Z, and that's that.
That's good.
I mean, Renee, I know you do a lot, or you did do a lot of form building with RS forms.
Yeah.
And I think by default on their name fields, they have some filtering rules, some validation rules.
Yeah, you can even enter regular expressions. And I was just checking one of the forms I recently built, and I do ask for their common name, the way they want to be called, as a one field for the name, and then a separate field for the username. And I even wrote there, use a minimum of 6, a maximum of 30 characters, only letters, digits, points, and underscores, no other reading marks, so to say.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing just what you told me. So I think I'm doing good.
You're doing good. I mean, as I said, I've given this. Not only have I given this talk to about 20 different user groups over the last 7 years, somebody else in the PHP community in England also gives the same talk.
Mm-hmm.
Or they did do until they came to my version of it and decided not to repeat their version. But every time I give the talk, there's always everybody in the room is like, yeah, I know about names. I know about names in forms. And you just see them nodding along as they introduce each different one. And then there's always one point, it's a different point for everybody, but there's always one point where someone goes, didn't know that, or that explains that problem, or whatever.
Right.
So it's always, and I know that there are guys in Drupal who saw this talk in 2014 who still tweet about it.
Yeah.
What do you think is the reason then why it wasn't appearing and then it was appearing? That's just because I'm quite curious.
It could have been software, could have been updated. There could have been an updated rule at some point.
Interesting, because you think they obviously got it right for a period and then decided to ignore it. So they obviously went to your talk when they first did it and then forgot about it when they did the update.
I mean, that could, it could be something as simple as that. I mean, so one of the things with Joomla, for example, 15 years, like there was a pull request today. I think Cristiano wrote the pull request, which was to remove an unused file. It was a layout. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, yes, it's not used, but why was it put there in the first place? At some point, it must have been used. Now, some things have changed over 15 years. Does anybody know, why we don't do that? So this one, it's a non-important one, but there has been one within the last 6 months which somebody wanted to change something. And because I've been around for 15 years, I remembered that it was put in there for a security problem, but it wasn't marked. It's not documented as it being there for a security issue because you wouldn't want to do that. So it's very easy on a software that's gone over a long period of time to people to change their mind, people to forget about the real reason behind something.
The classic one was recent, which caused a lot of problems, was speeding up site. It was a MySQL query. I think Richard will remember this quite well, where it was thought, well, hang on, why are we storing that? It's a simple yes or no. Why are we not storing it as a Boolean? So rather than, I think it was very character instead. So it changed to a Boolean. And what some of the people hadn't realized was that is only a Boolean if you're using one language, not two. And and if it's a multi-language site, then it stores the language encoding string there. And of course, what happened then was when we updated, the data type changed, and suddenly all of those people's sites, which were multilingual and have multiple languages on them, suddenly became yes or no, one or zero.
Yeah.
And lost.
Yeah. I remember that was the template styles for the templates. If you have different template style for each language, what you normally do if you want to have a greeting subtitle in your header
and usually it looks like it's Boolean data, but actually it's not in multilingual sites. So you have to cast your net wide before you change something. That's why I'm a little worried about us changing it. I mean, I know several ways to get rid of the issue, but I don't just do
But the reason you went into a trap, you went into a typical MySQL trap, because in very old times, MySQL was not really a relational database. It was a kind of a fast a spare database for websites, and so they did not have many data types. Everything was a string.
Yes.
And from these times, it comes that we store booleans, or until Joomla 3, we stored booleans as strings, string 1, string 0, and such stuff.
Yeah.
And then the people change it to integer. And of course, if you see that piece of code, you think you can change it. That was a really bad gap in which you went.
and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have it's called institutional memory. You know, it's people who have been around for a long time will remember some of the things that other people just haven't, you know, just look at the code and go, oh yes, that's an easy change to make.
I don't want to know how often we have changed code and then changed it back for code style stuff just because nobody knows what has happened 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. And then sometimes cast it in integer, and then something happens later when people test Postgres, then they change it back to a string.
Most of the time that happens is when people don't actually look at the history of the code and go back to. So we had an issue currently in Joomla 4 beta. No, it's in Joomla 3. Sorry. Something was changed and something happened. Okay, it got reported and someone wrote a fix. But what they didn't do was look to see, well, what caused the problem? Because 1 week later, I came along on a different area of Joomla and found the same problem. And so that person then wrote the fix just in that one place. So instead of they were just putting band-aids on. They weren't solving the real problem. But enough of that. I'm sure you really want to know about Bootstrap 5.
Well, I don't, but I better do it. Okay, well, thank you very much. And always